Hello YouTube. This is Alpha White Wolf bringing you another movie review. Now, I know this movie came out some time ago, but I figured that I would do another movie review, and Ghostbusters was one of my favorite franchises when I was a kid. Now, honestly, there was a number of other movies that I probably could have done that deserve this more, but I'll probably get to those later on. So, in keeping with how I usually do movie reviews, I'll be discussing the movie's setting, then its characters, before finishing off with the plot. I'll also be including how I would have gone about writing this movie if I had that kind of say. The film takes place in New York, much like the 1984 original and the 1989 sequel. There really isn't much to say in regards to the setting, as it's meant to portray a modern New York City, in the same way that the originals portrayed the 80s New York, or their modern New York City. While the film was criticized for its female main cast, I didn't really have much of an issue with that. My issue came more as a result of how each one of these new characters reflected the original series counterparts. Erin Gilbert, played by Kristen Wiig, is the Peter Venkman of the group. Now, this replaces the more flirtatious mannerisms with a more professional demeanor, but it still manages to maintain that initial skepticism towards the paranormal that Venkman had. What's interesting though is that this character's transformation from a relatively passive professor to an active Ghostbuster was not only interesting to me, but honestly, my favorite part in regards to character development throughout this film. Abby Yates, played by Melissa McCarthy, took the place of Dan Aykroyd's Raymond Stantz as the somewhat awkward nerd. However, while Aykroyd's character managed to be the heart of his group, McCarthy brought out a lot of the traits that she has shown in her other movies. Namely, she felt too goofy. Aykroyd's character managed to balance brains and endearing goofiness and a kind of childlike wonder towards the paranormal, whereas McCarthy's felt like all goof with little dashes of brains. Her silliness was not as endearing, and her awkwardness felt more like bumbling at times than anything else. Jillian Holtzman, played by Kate McKinnon, took the place of Egon Spengler, as played by Harold Ramis. Egon, unlike Aykroyd's character, managed to come across as a pure intellectual, a reserved mad scientist, if you will. Holtzman was a character who seemed to be trying to go for the more edgy mad scientist. McKinnon's character seemed to be trying for a cool, kick-ass intellectual, and she was able to do that fairly well. She was able to craft awesome tech, clearly can use it well, and frankly just doesn't give a fuck. The problem is, there were times when it seemed like she was trying too hard to be cool. And when you have to try too hard to be cool, you come off as more of a dweeb. Patty Tolan, played by Leslie Jones, took the place of Winston Zeddemore, as played by Ernie Hudson. Now, both of these characters joined their respective teams for practical purposes. Patty was seeking help following meeting a ghost for the first time, and Winston was just looking for a job. Winston was meant to be an everyman, an outsider joining a team of expert academics. Patty was very similar, but she was more of a practical history buff who was known for being able to spout off facts about areas that her team just wasn't familiar with. She was able to outsmart the academics and nerds when it came to the history of certain areas. Now, both of these characters could be described as blue-collar workers surrounded by nerdy academics, and that's what makes them relatable and kind of interesting to watch. Rowan North, as played by Neil Casey, was the antagonist of the film. A man who had been bullied throughout his life, he eventually rose to become an incredibly brilliant occultist. He was clearly overqualified for his rather low-paying job, so he constructed a plan to take revenge on humanity. His intent was to bring forth an army of ghosts and lead them in his efforts to take revenge. Now, what was most interesting about his character was the fact that he was able to appear so harmless, but still managed to have this moment of quiet anger as he was looking at his accolades. You get to really feel for him. And anyone who's ever been passed over, despite the fact that they are clearly more qualified, could probably relate to Rowan in those moments. Honestly, the one casting choice that perplexed me the most came from Chris Hemsworth playing Kevin, the dumb receptionist. Janine Melnitz, played by Annie Potts, was sarcastic, witty, and at times funny. Her somewhat nasal voice made dialogue from her, specifically her complaints and quips, very entertaining to listen to. Kevin, on the other hand, is a deeply disappointing character. As a character, he is insufferably idiotic. But as a choice of actor for this role, it's just baffling to me. You cannot come from Thor, a badass warrior thunder god, and this was his second Thor movie, mind you, and then just slide into Kevin, the moron who can't work a phone despite the fact that he's an adult by now. Now, the plot, thankfully, didn't follow any of the original movies. And I say thankfully because this is actually kind of refreshing. Instead of trying to face a obscure god or an undead sorcerer, they're fighting a guy who's using a ghost army to try and destroy or take over the world. It's a different kind of opponent, and I think that's very admirable to try. They're trying to pave their own way. Now, the movie itself isn't bad, but it obviously isn't as good as its creative team was hoping for. After seeing it, I have to agree with the middling scores that it got, the relatively average scoring that it received. Much like the live-action Resident Evil films, this is a kind of movie I would put on while I'm vacuuming my living room or washing dishes. It's something that I would put on just to kind of distract myself from what I'm actually doing, but not something I would pay much attention to either way. In regards to the movie itself though, what struck me the most about it was all the wasted potential. It was thought of that this movie was going to be a passing of the torch kind of film, passing along the title of Ghostbusters to this new, fresh team. But if they wanted that, there were a number of ways that they could have gone about it that would have been much better. And this is just how I would have done it if I had been allowed to guide the movie along. I would have opened on the original team, maybe attending or fresh from the funeral of Egon. This would allow the absence of the character to be explained and also work in Harold Ramis's actual death. Now, upon being done with the funeral and working on the grieving process, the rest of the team would start realizing that they need to retire. They need to get a new team in place so that when they leave, there's someone to continue the fight. And they start working on recruiting replacements. Jillian would come in and start just wowing Ray with her tech, while he mentors both her and Abby. Winston and Patty would kind of bond at poking fun at the eggheads, while Winston shows Patty Ecto-1, how to care for it, how to keep it going for as long as possible, and as an activity for them to bond over. Now, a subplot that could be here is a kind of conflict coming from Venkman and Aaron. Namely, Aaron's irritation over Venkman's more flirtatious mannerisms. Now, what makes this interesting is that not only can Aaron respond to such flirtations, but Janine can respond to it with age-related jokes to bring in some additional humor and really kind of poke fun at the aged professor. Now, throughout all of this, it can be a nice, long training montage, maybe a few arguments breaking out here and there, but ultimately the big problem would be from Venkman. He would be the one who thinks that they still got it, they can still manage this, they can still do this job, despite his team's insistence otherwise. Now eventually though, Venkman, his team, and the trainees would come across something that the old team cannot handle. And that would give the newbies their chance to shine, bringing in their new tech, their new methods, and their new mindsets. And when the newbies take down this big bad ghost, Venkman would finally be able to conclude that it's time for him to hang up his proton pack. It's time for him to stop. He would give his blessings to the team before he and the other originals retire, and the new team would be able to ride off on Ecto-1 and just start going at it and bringing the new face of the Ghostbusters into the public light. Oh, and a little side note, Janine throughout this would be training Kevin to be the receptionist. In my version, he also wouldn't be an idiot. He would be at least an average intelligent individual. Now, this is just like a rough outline of how I would have done it, but I do think that it would have been a better movie than what we actually got. But this is just my opinion. If you disagree and want to talk with me about why, I welcome it, I encourage it. As I've always said, progress and consensus cannot be effectively reached in an echo chamber. So if you liked the video, please indicate so down below with that thumbs up. If you like this video and some of the other content on the channel, please hit subscribe, it really helps us out. If you have suggestions for future videos, drop them down below in the comments, or if you have anything that you want to tell me, if you have anything that you want to recommend, go ahead, drop that down in the comments. But without further ado, this has been Alpha White Wolf. I'm signing off. You keep howling, Wolfpack.